Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Silicon Valley Entrepreneur. I'm your guest host for the evening, Dave Cokerhook. Typically, you see Chris Gill in this seat interviewing an entrepreneur from the Valley, but this evening he couldn't be here to host the show because he's actually the guest tonight. So, welcome, Chris. Appreciate your being on the other side here. You're going to field the questions today. And as you know, Chris is the CEO of SVASE, which is Silicon Valley Association of Startup Entrepreneurs. So, Chris, welcome to your own show.
Thank you very much, David. It's a pleasure to be here.
So let's take things from a different angle. Usually when you're interviewing someone, they're an entrepreneurial company or there may be a funding agency or whatever, and you're talking about how entrepreneurs can actually thrive in this economy and whatever. But I'd like to have us talk about your organization, how it came about, et cetera. And I'd kind of like to start with what your background is and how you ended up ultimately doing what you're doing now.
Okay, so unlike the richest man in the world, Carlos Slim, who began, I understand, selling even cookies and soft drinks to his family when he was about 8 or 9, I had no clue what I wanted to do at that age. And certainly when I got to universities, I was only interested in motorcycles, girls, and music. So
that sounds pretty normal, right there.
And even when I came out of university, I still wasn't clear what I wanted to do. But I very quickly learned that engineers, and I'd been fortunate enough to go on a computer engineering course, one of the very, very early ones, which is both hardware and software. Engineers gain no respect and no money. So I got very frustrated and very angry about having to work with people who I didn't have a lot of respect for and didn't give engineers, quite frankly, the time of day.
And this was computer engineering you're talking
about, right? Yeah, yes and no. Back in 1971, 72, when I graduated from university, computers were still relatively new things.
Sure.
They were big machines in huge air-conditioned rooms. You had acolytes in white coats that would look after them. But through a series of happy circumstances, I happened to get to work with some of the first microprocessors that came into the UK. So I got very early to work with some of the stuff that is now very commonplace, but at the time it made me the one-eyed man in the kingdom of the blind.
Right.
And when I figured out that I wasn't going to get very far as an engineer in the environment that I was in, although I'd got involved with some very interesting stuff, we started to computerized photo type setting very early on, and we talked about doing things like editing of the typesetting going in, which was verboten because that would upset the print unions. You couldn't do that; it'd take their jobs away. I got involved with doing an early version of the internet for Reuters, the news agency. We came over here to the States, we looked at DARPANET, and we took the packet switch system and began implementing it for Reuters, which was the largest private communications network in the world at the time.
You were doing this as an employee of a company?
Of Reuters at the time, yeah.
Okay.
And then at that time, I found people coming to, because we were going to buy a lot of computer hardware, coming to sell me equipment, and I thought, geez, these people are turning up in expensive cars, expensive suits, taking me out for expensive meals, and they're clueless. They have no idea what they're talking about. They don't even bother asking me what we're looking for in a computer, the specs looking for. They just talk at me, just want a steamroller over me.
Right.
And so I thought, hey, I know I'm not a brilliant engineering guy. I'm never going to be one. I've met some brilliant engineers and thought, I can't do that. But I thought, I could do a better job than you do on the sales side. So I looked around for opportunities in sales and took a job with a great company that started me on the road of doing an on-the-job MBA program, in effect.
Okay.
This was called ITT. They're a huge company at the time. They had their own university at the time.
Right.
And not only did I get to go into sales and gradually move my way through to being management, but they exposed me to all the things like sales, marketing, personnel, accounting.
Oh, fantastic.
The whole lot.
Get a huge, well-rounded
all of
exposure.
That
so
by
that
some of the
you
best
understand
brains in the world.
And therefore you have an understanding of the inside of a business from many different angles. A lot of people will get into a career and they have a very narrow view. They know one thing. They know accounting, or they know production control, or they know marketing, or whatever. But they don't have that overall perspective of what makes a company run. Okay.
Well, this was huge to me, and it was a big eye-opener for me.
So how did you get from there to here?
So my first startup fell into my lap, almost literally. I was working with one of the large bank chains in the UK, and was installing some equipment there when the guy who was running it said, I asked him what were his biggest problems, and one of them he said was they couldn't print checks for new accounts fast enough. You had to send them out to a jobbing printer, and it would take 2 to 3 weeks to get the checks, customized checks back. And I said, boy, I can do that. I can get those to turn around on the spot with a microprocessor development and a Canon printer and a bit of software. You could do it just like that. Now, I wasn't capable of doing it, but I knew some programmers who were.
Okay.
So he said, right, if you can do that, I'll give you, then it was almost $100,000 to do that. So we started doing the first job. We got the installation up, and it worked, and they were delighted and happy. And at that point, they said, okay, can you roll this out to the rest of the banks? And at that point, I knew I was found out.
So you actually had a business.
I had a business.
Then. Oh my God!
and this was way beyond me. I knew the programmers that had done it. They'd cobbled together the software, and there was no documentation. It wasn't production proven, any of that sort of stuff. And I knew I didn't have the experience to pull together a team that could actually roll it out.
And what happened to that business?
So I sold that business to the chief programmer.
Okay.
It did go fairly well, but never made it to roll out to all the banks because other better manufactured systems came along.
So the competition
was
ahead of the game,
steamroller
and they took it over. Okay.
But
then you got the taste.
Absolutely, and that's what started the whole thing off. So I was not an entrepreneur from the ground up. I became an entrepreneur. Wow, this is what I want to do because this gives me the opportunity to some extent to control my own destiny. I enjoyed having the opportunity to make my own decisions. The thing I learned that I needed to go and do some work on was that I had to make the decisions, and I didn't have the experience and the knowledge to know how to do a lot of that.
Okay.
So I took full advantage of being at ITT and worked my way through all of that, and eventually left there to go and help run the European operation for a US company called Mostec, working out of Brussels, to again broaden my experience in the commercial world rather than the technical world. From there, a series of fortunate, not so much at the time, happy events came along. Mostec got taken over by United Technologies.
Okay.
United Technologies builds aerospace engines.
They are, and they're huge.
And these take 10, 15 years to develop, whereas semiconductor industry, you're going to get the next product out in 6 months.
Right.
So just a complete culture clash. I wanted out of there. It just so happened my old boss at ITT didn't get the top job that he wanted. And so he phoned me up and said, how about we start a company? So out of the blue came this opportunity, but it came with just something that I didn't really appreciate at the time, which was a team. And we came up with the idea of, let's do what we both know from ITT days, which is distributing and marketing and selling high technology components. But with me on board, we could do it in a different way than we'd seen every other organization doing it. We could put a twist on the business model. And we recruited 2 other people to help us form the founding team. We had complementary skill sets, very clear who was going to do what, and we went from number 365 in the UK to number 1 in a 10-year period.
Fantastic. Now, you said something within that little story that was very interesting to me, because I see in my work with business, I've been doing work with small and medium-sized companies for about 30 years. The idea of making sure you've got a team and actually complementary skill sets, because so many guys will go out and start a company and they just figure they've got to ramrod it all through and know it all themselves, and they're not necessarily willing to embrace other individuals who may actually know something that they don't know.
Well, that's what I thought too with the first one that I ever had, and realized pretty quickly that there's actually far too many things you to do, particularly if you want to grow it big. And having other people that you can not only do a lot of the stuff that has to be done, but you can also bounce things off of. And it's actually good to have differing views on topics.
Absolutely.
And you might end up with the solution that you started out with, but it's actually good to go through perhaps a half day or a day long process of figuring out what it is you're going to do on a strategic basis. So that everybody has had the opportunity to expose it all, they bought into it, and now we're all going to know what we're going to go and do.
And then I got all the horses pulling in the same direction.
You bet. That's extremely important. And so that got me there. We ended up doing a series of 6 companies, 5 of which were extremely successful. We ended up consolidating them into one, and we positioned ourselves to get acquired by a big American corporation called Avnet.
Oh, okay, sure.
The biggest distributor of electronics and computers in the world now. So at that time we had $100 million sales in Europe, and they brought me over here in '94 to help turn around the North American operation, which had declining sales at the time. But it was a big culture shock, because even at that size in Europe, I knew most people.
Sure.
And we had a company culture that was, you don't bitch and moan about other people. You figure out what the problem is, and you go ahead and you fix it. And if you come across a process or anything that you think you can do better, you come and you just make it better. You just do it.
And you weren't finding that when you transitioned over?
It's different working for larger corporations.
Sure.
They've got their own cultures, and Avnet is a terrific company. The fact that it's the number 1 company in its field now says it's a terrific company.
Right.
But it wasn't what I was used to being with. It was back into...
Your experience, it sounds like, had more of that entrepreneurial flair to it, the opportunity to create something new and different and to push in a new direction. So then you were here in the States then, and eventually you ended up here in the Bay Area.
Yep.
And then you how did you decide that you wanted to do this work with SVASE?
Well, after 5 years with Avnet, very rightly they were going to move the headquarters to Phoenix, and I was based here. I said, cut me out of it, I'm going to go. And of all the places in the world that I would want to be at the time, this is the place, because this has got the entrepreneurial bent to it. And I figured out pretty solidly after that 5 years, I was an entrepreneurial startup guy, I was not a big company guy.
Right.
So I started doing things. I started a small company myself. It was a web-based business, but I also started volunteering for SVASE.
Oh, okay.
And got involved with some very interesting programs there. One of which was having dinner with myself and 4 or 5 first-time CEOs with the brightest people I get my hands on. Steve Wozniak of Apple, Ray Lane of Oracle, Dan Warman-Homan of NetApp, Eric Benhamou of Palm. People that you otherwise just wouldn't meet.
Sure.
But because it was SVASE, they would come and have dinner with us.
Ah, wonderful.
This was just a terrific way to meet some terrific people. And one of the things that I got involved in after Avnet, I did a fabulous semiconductor turnaround and a couple of other things. I was asked to do a turnaround at an incubator up in Sacramento, which I did part-time, learnt very quickly incubators don't really work very well, the model's not very good. But after a year of that, and gave it back to them, this is a really interesting area for me. I enjoyed that because it was involved with entrepreneurs, I could add value to it, blah, 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 blah. And so when the current SVASE CEO moved on to another role.
Mm-hmm.
Was fortunate enough, because I've been involved with SVASE, the board asked me if I would take it on.
Mm-hmm.
And absolutely, because this is just a great, I'd seen it was a great organization.
And you haven't looked back.
I haven't looked back.
So let's talk a little bit about what it is that the organization can do for entrepreneurs here in the Bay Area.
It's very, so SVASE is an organization that's meant to be a resource for first-time entrepreneurs. As it turns out, we get a lot of entrepreneurs coming back time and time again,
Mm-hmm.
because we do provide a significant value to them. And for entrepreneurs, usually if it's your first time, your only reference point is a job.
Right.
And being an entrepreneur is not a job. It's very, very different to doing that.
Mm-hmm.
You have to commit totally to it, and you get completely involved in it. It takes over your whole life, and you've got to put everything into it. It's not 9 to 5.
Mm-hmm.
On top of that, in Silicon Valley, the types of businesses that startups tend to happen here in the high-tech area want to be venture funded.
Right.
And the venture funding process has become increasingly complex. So what we focus on with SVASE, and what the guys who started SVASE were very smart to focus on, was the business aspects of getting a startup going, and the venture. How do you look like you could be a venture fundable business?
Right.
That's what we focus on.
So that tells me that you've got an infrastructure that's going to help somebody that has a bright idea, and wants to try to make it into a real company, but hasn't had the experience of trying to make a company before. You're going to give them direction and counseling onto how to actually build an organization, because until you have an organization, you're not going to get funded. Is that?
Yes and no. So the original meaning of entrepreneur from the French is somebody who does things.
Mm-hmm.
So what I saw with working at the incubator, trying to turn that around, was if you give people stuff on a plate, if you tell them how they should be doing things, they'll say yes, 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 and they'll go off and do something
whatever
else.
They don't. Yeah. Okay.
So I figured out, how did I learn well when I came through? And when I was running the other companies, how did I encourage people I was mentoring to come through?
Mm-hmm.
I'd share with them or get them exposure to, these are the best practices in this field.
Mm-hmm.
Now you've got to go and experience it for yourself. You've got to go and do it. Because that's the key way that people learn.
Mm-hmm.
And so what we do with SVASE, we expose people to best practices. If you want to be a venture fundable company, you've got to kind of look like this.
Okay.
This tends not to get funded, but the choice is yours. So you're an adult, you make your choices.
Cool.
We tend to have the messages delivered by people that can help entrepreneurs move forward.
Mm-hmm.
Those are VCs, entrepreneurs, and successful VCs, angels, and successful serial entrepreneurs.
Mm-hmm.
So all the events that we run, I can't think of one that doesn't, feature those people. So they're getting the messages about best practices from
Mm-hmm.
people that they can also meet with, who can
Right.
help them move forward.
So how do you determine the success of what it is that you do? How do you measure that? What's your barometer to say, we're actually having a positive impact?
It's extremely difficult, and I've struggled with this for the first couple of years actually, because the vast majority of companies, startups, don't end up getting funded.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you measure success? Just to give you some numbers, there's maybe 400,000 engineers and technologists in Silicon Valley, of which at any one time we estimate around 20,000 are thinking about becoming entrepreneurs.
Okay.
On an annual basis, so last year, roughly 320 companies got A round venture funded. Maybe a further 300 got angel funded.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a very small percentage
Sure.
of people actually get funded. But I look at success in two ways. One, I can say from public records over the last 2 years, SVASE members have raised in excess of $126 million, which is one measure of success.
Sure.
The other is the number of people that continue to come into SVASE. Our whole membership turns over every 12 to 18 months.
Turns over.
Turns over. Because that's how long it takes for somebody to figure out they haven't got a viable, fundable business. Remember, most businesses are not fundable.
Right.
So
that's an interesting point. It's not that most businesses aren't funded, it's that they're not fundable, which is a significant difference.
Very different thing. So, you know, the people who recognize that, that is also a success.
Sure.
Because people who don't recognize that they don't have a fundable business can have just a devastating impact on your life.
Absolutely.
And we sort of kind of have the mantra of fail fast, fail often, which is a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but it should be more like, you know, get something out there in the market. Check with your customers first. Get something out as fast and cheap as you can that's, you know, as an approximate fit. Not a Rolls Royce, it's a bicycle that at least people can try out. And if it's not quite right, keep tweaking it. If you get improvements, great, keep tweaking it. And if you can see it going that way, wonderful. If it hits that inflection point and starts to go, terrific. If it doesn't, and nobody wants to buy it, or you've been working for 5 years and you haven't yet got a product out, and if you're in the life science industry, that's just going through the approval cycle, but and in the tech side, then it's maybe time to stop and think you should maybe go and take it to a customer and show a customer and see if they want to buy it. And I mean, it's not just startups. Public companies make the mistakes of doing that.
Absolutely.
That they keep building something that nobody wants to buy.
That's one of the things I think can happen to people so often is they'll get so vested in what it is that they're doing, what they think that they are going to be able to provide, that they don't look outside and to determine, is this something that the market is actually interested in?
Yeah.
Okay. Is it before its time? Is it after its time? Is it nobody really cares? Because if that's the case, like you said, you're going to need to make a shift. You have to decide to bury this one and go on to something else. If you've got that passion to want to have your own business, likely if you look around and either within yourself or around where you can acquire an idea, you'll have a chance to do it. But don't dig yourself a hole.
And what we've seen with the most successful entrepreneurs are the people who find out very quickly, get data back from customers, and then adapt to what they're doing in terms of the product or the business model or the way they market it to better fit what the customer needs, so they can come up with a good product fit for the market, and a robust business model that allows them to generate revenue and profit.
Fantastic.
And you know, you have to experience it.
Yeah.
We can't teach you it. You have to experience it.
That's true. Yeah, it becomes visceral.
It does.
We've got a few minutes left in our discussion. I want to take us to a topic that you had mentioned to me when we first started talking that's fairly new for SVASE, which is launchsiliconvalley.org.
Yeah.
Right? You've got a website up there, but there's a whole movement in another direction that you guys are just starting to make available, if I remember correctly. Yeah?
Sure. So Launch Silicon Valley is a platform that we were asked to come up with because there wasn't one at the time we started it 5 years ago, to provide a very cost-effective platform for startup companies to launch their products to the world in front of an audience of VCs, bloggers, press, television cameras. I mean, we had Fox News last year. It looks like we're going to be the same again this year. And it's a terrific boost to companies to get that exposure. We had 400 companies submit last year. We had 30 spots. And the exposure you can get means that you can attract customers, you can attract partners, you can attract investors. It's just a terrific platform to do it. And we keep it really cost effective to get into to do it. We're going beyond that a little bit this year. It's not quite associated with Launch Silicon Valley, but the other gap that we've seen as venture capital has become increasingly difficult to get hold of. You know, there's a big turmoil in the industry. Money supply has dropped down by at least half. Venture firms are finding they're not able to raise money. Seed stage, high risk money is becoming less and less available.
Right.
So I decided last year to see if we could put together a seed fund. We haven't come up with a seed fund, but by, again, a series of very fortunate happenstances, we've been able to connect with a new seed fund called Cambridge West Ventures, which has some very solid finance behind it, and we've come up with a joint seed funding program.
Fantastic.
We launched that at the start of February, so just over 5 weeks ago. We had 70 companies submit to us in the first 3 weeks. We closed the door at that point because we've got limited resources.
Right.
We've had detailed interviews with 15 of the companies. I mean, they're terrific companies. I've just been blown away by how advanced the thinking, the team development, the engagement with the customers, how far they've gone, and they're looking for seed money.
That's fantastic.
This is $50,000.
Wow.
And we're anticipating making our first investment within the next 2 to 3 weeks.
That's great. Well, we need to wrap up at this point, but I'd like to have you just give one last comment, and that has to do with who should search you out. I mean, in terms of guys who have ideas, women who have ideas, entrepreneurial ideas, who should be searching for what SVASE has to offer?
So anybody who's a first-time entrepreneur should definitely come to SVASE. They can learn very quickly what the landscape is all about, what tends to work, what tends not to work. They can meet terrific people who can help them move forward, and will give them opportunities to grow. If you're further down the path, then we have programs to work with those people too.
Fantastic.
So those are the people who should be coming to SVASE.
So anybody with a bright idea, pretty much.
Anybody with a bright idea.
Fantastic. Chris, thank you very much
Not
for
at
sitting
all.
in the hot seat today. We
It's nice.
appreciate that.
I appreciate the opportunity.
And ladies and gentlemen, next time you'll see Chris over in this seat, so come join him next time here on the Silicon Valley Entrepreneur. Thank you very much.